Greetings everyone, hey, how you doing? It's Matt Sella. Today we are doing a special retrospective review for a movie that I have never seen until today. What is it, year 2021? Somewhere around that. This movie came out, at least in the US, in 1995. That's right, we're gonna talk about Ghost in the Shell. And joined here with me in person this time. Wow, are things getting better? I don't know. We'll probably not talk about that, but instead talk about this classic nostalgic movie that my co-host here has great nostalgic roots in and enjoys the pants out of.
It's Mirella.
That's right, it's Mirella. Everyone say hello to Mirella, and Mirella, say hello to everyone.
Hello, all humans, or are you?
Yes, that's true. They could be cybernetics by the time they're listening to this podcast review.
Yes, and we'll all be merged with the internet.
Oh boy, I'm not sure if I'm ready for a Ready Player One kind of setting.
I'm not ready for YouTube comments.
No, it's going to be terrible.
Yeah.
But hopefully this retrospect will not be. So yeah, as you heard, folks, I have not seen Ghost in the Shell. Mirella has.
Yes.
And so I thought it'd be kind of fun to check out this movie. I actually got it on 4K for only $10, which I guess is a steal. And we watched it and we have some thoughts on it. Mirella's going to say whether some elements hold up or not, what were some interesting themes that this film explores. And it's also going to be kind of fun and challenging to talk about this because, correct me if I'm wrong, Mirella, this movie does kind of help shape a lot of American sci-fi films from that point in 1995. A lot of films like The Matrix and a few other movies have come out that drew inspiration from Ghost in the Shell. It was like one of the milestones of Japanese filmmaking, not just Akira as well.
Yeah, it's like a huge cultural moment for people.
Exactly, and we're going to talk about some of those elements, see if someone like myself who's seen this in modern eyes can kind of appreciate that, and Mirella kind of giving some of her insights on it as well. Now, before we begin, folks, may I remind you that here on the Matt Sella podcast channel, we like to talk about animation, whether in TVs or movies. So if you enjoy reviews just like that, consider liking this video, subscribe, and share among your friends and family. It really helps the channel, which, by the way, of course, if you want to watch me do some animating and Toon Boom Harmony, I usually stream on weekends via Twitch. So links are in the description below. Anywho, folks, let's get into this retrospective. And by the way, it is a spoiler talk review, so you have been warned, spoilers ahead. Now, y'all ready? Then here we go. Now, what is the general synopsis for this movie, Mirella? Well, please correct me because I'm probably going to butcher this, but Ghost in the Shell takes place in 2029, where the advancement in cybernetic technology, the human body can be augmented. Ooh, sounds like fun, huh? Well, not entirely, for there is a criminal hacker on the loose who is ghosting people. No, not like Samuel Jackson being ghosted, more like occupying people like a virus and making them do terrible things, I think. And so it is up to Major Motoko Katsunagi and her pal Bateau and the Public Security Section 9 in Newport City in Japan to solve this mystery. And that is my dumb brain summing it up as best as I could. I probably butchered it, Mirella, but I say let's kick off this retrospective. Again, this movie came out in 1995, at least in the West. Watching it now in 2021. What are some of your takeaways, and how do you think it holds up to today's cinema?
It's important to note that I saw this film when I was about 14 or 15 years old, and it had a huge impact on me. I had never seen like a movie that presented these deep ideas, and it just really impressed me. That's the best way I could describe it, actually. So it has a really nostalgic part in my heart, and I've definitely seen Ghost in the Shell Innocence, and I've seen other Ghost in the Shell things. And I've seen anime remakes. I've seen anything Ghost in the Shell, really, because I was really attached to this franchise. And oddly enough, I hadn't seen it in maybe about 10 years, I'd say. So it was really fun watching it with you because you had never seen it before.
That's absolutely true. I've never seen it. And quick disclaimer here, folks. I've also never seen the Scarlett Johansson version live action remake of Ghost in the Shell. I don't know if you have or not, but I haven't.
So, Matt, so you haven't seen it before, and this movie is made in 1995, like we said. How do you think it holds up to modern eyes? Because I'm viewing it from a very nostalgic point of view, and I can almost forgive its faults, let's just say.
Fair enough.
So I was wondering, what is it like to see this movie, keeping in mind that it's such a huge cultural point? Like, a lot of people reference this movie. A lot of people bring up GIFs of it. A lot of people bring up, snippets of this online. It's almost impossible to get away from this movie. So what is it like finally watching it for you?
So watching it myself now, I will say this much right off the bat. I have a great appreciation for what this movie has brought upon modern filmmaking when it comes to sci-fi elements and even storytelling, talking about the philosophical approach about what it means to transcend from a human life form to something cybernetic, something that could be considered immortal, but what does it really all mean about like passing on AI as DNA and all that kind of stuff. So we had a pre-show talk about a lot of these elements. We were talking about the intelligence behind it. But to kind of get things out of the way now, I'm going to talk more on the superficial level here. The thing that was tough for me to take in is normally I'm not a fan of exposition dumps where characters are constantly telling us how the world works, what's going on, what's the objective. And there's always, and again, I'm trying not to fault the movie too much for this, but we always have these movies that kind of start up saying like, I'm introducing a character and saying like, oh yeah, aren't you the guy who was in the 5th, 4th, and 7th division, earned a medal here and there, and is going through some kind of life trauma of some sort? I'm not saying that's exactly what happened with some of these characters, but I really got that sense where we were told who these characters were and why they're so, or where they are in the film. So that did bother me a little bit with this movie. Throughout the whole thing, there was a lot of talking going on, kind of exchange of ideas, which I can understand how that can be appealing for some people, like just normal conversations. That can really delve into some interesting character pieces. But for me, I really want to see how this world worked, how this cybernetic technology really integrated into the social populace. I wanted to know what was at stake when the puppet master was starting to control these people through this notion of a ghost system, which I get, but I think part of it went over my head. So I do apologize ahead of time if I say something a little ignorant in that regard. So in terms of like just modern filming, the pacing was very strange to me. It was very slow, and I thought the editing could have been tightened up just a little bit. There were parts where I think I understood what they were trying to go for, and we'll probably get into this when we talk about the animation some more, but there were some shots where I think they were holding there to try to kind of convey what the character might be thinking, trying to figure out before they go off and do something. But because the characters weren't moving at all, it just kind of felt like an awkward still frame hold. So there were a bunch of things like that just weren't really working for me. It was a little slow, it was a little sluggish, but in terms of its philosophy and themes, it definitely covers some interesting ideas. Did you want to expand on any of those elements, Mirella?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to view this from a modern perspective because although I love this movie and I have I'm very invested in this movie in general, and it made a huge impact on me, I have to agree with you that it's oddly paced and there are information dumps. And you don't quite understand the significance of certain characters and what they're doing and how it's affecting other characters. And you don't quite understand the importance of the puppet master and why he's so dangerous, for example. And I guess part of me wants to defend, because I do like this movie, and say that it's trying to go for a more philosophical approach rather than traditional exposition. And we also have to keep in mind that this was made in 1995 or around there. And so there's a whole different aesthetic of how movies should be told, how much is a good amount of silence. And we're in the modern age right now. We like more fast-paced movies. We appreciate like more tight storytelling. We appreciate tighter tighter editing and other stuff like that. So I don't think it quite holds up to a modern audience. And I think a modern audience would have a bit of trouble with it. And I think that's okay. I'm personally okay with that.
We didn't talk much about this in the pre-show, Mirella, but I remember I was listening to a film podcast and they were kind of talking about, I think they were talking about some of the older Spielberg films, and they were saying this film, I think it may have been Jurassic Park. I think it was like a Red Letter Media commentary thing. They were kind of talking about how that movie was kind of like the end of an era of certain type of storytelling when it comes to movies, and how everything like nowadays kind of like what we were saying before, very fast paced, very quick, to the point, going from beat to beat to beat, not really letting moments to slow down and kind of recoup what just happened. So my negative criticisms of this Ghost in a Shell movie, I very much admit that I'm kind of used to modern day films, and at least in the US. So I definitely think my opinion is 100% subjective on that regard.
But I do have to agree, it does have pacing issues. Like, I know that I'm very for this film, but I 100% agree it has pacing issues and it has info dumps. And I wish we had a more better understanding of the stakes involved for each of the characters in order for us to be invested in them. And I think that is, we can fault it.
Yes, for sure. And that's definitely what I wish I had time to really not necessarily get to know Major or Bateau. I definitely wish we had more, as you said, the ramifications of this puppet master guy. I wanted to know how much is he upsetting the balance of this world. But moving on, let's talk about some other elements that were very interesting about this movie that you wanted to bring up. And it's in terms of its visual aesthetic, some of the elements that they use, especially on Major, how they portray violence and nudity. You brought up some really fascinating points about that when it comes to the Major. And reminder, folks, this is a spoiler talk review. We are going to talk about what happened at the end. And it's a retrospective. This movie came out, 25, 26 years ago. Yeah. So if you haven't seen the ending of it, I don't know what to tell you. We're going to talk about the ending. Okay. So yeah, Mirella, you brought up some really interesting points about how Major sees herself, how stoic she can be versus someone like Bateau who sees her as like a partner, almost human in a way, but you see these contrasting etiquettes, if you will. Could you go into detail about that?
Yeah, sure. This is actually something that I noticed when I first watched it when I was 15. I was really taken aback by Major's ability to just disrobe. And let's be real here, there's a lot of nudity in this film. And it's very easy to look at it as a very graphic film, which it is. But the nudity actually has a point, in my opinion. And the very first thing that I noticed when I was even 14 or 15 was that she didn't understand the concept of nudity and the concept that she was female and gendered. For example, she just undresses in front of Bateau at any time because it seems to me that she didn't feel ashamed of her body. Therefore, she had no concept of shame. So therefore, no body. So it just it's a very subtle thing where it enforces that this is her shell. This is her body. This is a means to an end, so to speak. And her inside is her ghost, which is, I think it's kind of commented in that you kind of just get replaced into a new shell through the years. So your consciousness continues, your ghost continues. So, for example, back to basically her undressing, what I found really interesting is Bateau's reaction to her undressing. For example, when she's diving and he's really concerned that she'll sink, she comes back up and she's starting to undress and he looks away from her because he doesn't want to see her undress. And I thought that was really interesting because that indicates that he's more human than her. He has shame and he understands that she's a person, that he's connected to her, so he should look away. There's a moment where she asks him how human and how cyborg, what parts he is of cyborg, and he never answers.
Yeah.
And I thought that was very interesting. He decided just not answer, and she just went ahead with the next sentence, and I thought that was really clever.
Yeah. And based off our discussion with the show, when the puppet master reveals himself as an AI that became self-aware, and then you kind of get into the nuance argument. It's isn't that considered a life form? Yeah. Kind of thing like that. What I found interesting, at least my mind can comprehend, is I feel like, at least when it comes to the protagonist and the antagonist, they kind of act as a spectrum where, Bateau, he is cybernetic. He has robotic arm and maybe
the eyes,
opticals as well, but he still has the humility of a human being.
And the shame and
certain etiquette and respect.
Yeah.
Whereas Major, it's like you said, it's just a vessel. It doesn't really matter as long as it does the job. And the job that she's trying to figure out is find out what's the deal with this puppet maker.
Yeah.
Whereas Puppet Maker has gone full on just self-preservation through AI technology trying to manipulate to expand upon it, as far as I can tell. And that's kind of like the spectrum. And the finale itself, which I would like you to go in more detail of because I'm still trying to process it a little bit, is where Major kind of crosses that line. Like, does she even have any humanity left in her, or does she empathize with the puppet master? And does she transcend into like the fusion of these two consciousness to create something new?
Yeah, I think something else that I wanted to point out is something animation-wise that was really subtle is that she barely ever blinks in the animation.
I was thinking about that too, because I was looking at some of the characters. Like, it's like, do any of these characters blink? Is that like a subtle little tick that they threw in there?
Yeah, it is, because it shows you how far they are augmented and become cyborg. I think it was really interesting in that she had this search for herself. And she really wanted to search for this puppet master because she felt that she might have gone too far into cyborg. Like, I had this feeling throughout this movie that she didn't know how human, or if she was even human. And at the very beginning of the film, we established that being hacked is really frightening, especially for human brains, because they don't understand what's happening. And there was like a point where Major and Bateau were looking through one of those one-way mirrors, and we're like, oh, that poor human. I mean, they never know how to handle being hacked. It was something along those lines. And I had this feeling throughout the movie that she was trying to find out exactly how human she is or isn't. And maybe by connecting to the puppet master, she could find out. I thought the puppet master really in and of himself, because he wanted to reproduce versus copy. And in traditional kind of AI stories, we think, oh, these machines just want to copy and recreate themselves, but he wanted to create modifications in order to survive. And it's interesting that he said, my wish to reproduce is what makes me human.
Yes.
And a lot of people will say, well, your consciousness and your ability to love makes you human. So there's lots of like really interesting arguments about humanity and consciousness. And I guess as a 14 or 15-year-old, I had never really gotten into those philosophical ideas. And so it really made me think. Also, I wanted to point out that it was very interesting when she was connecting with the puppet master, Bateau covered her torso up with his jacket.
Yeah.
So he covered her up because I think he's more human than her. Well, she's pure cyborg, actually.
Yes.
And he covered her up because he's connected to her. So he's thinking of her as him, like the same. So he's connecting to her, which is a very human thing to kind of project like that. But he didn't cover up the puppet master because he recognized that that was pure AI. I don't know. It was just a very interesting little point that they were basically had this identical face. He could have not covered up both of them to make it easier, but he covered up Major. Yeah,
because he definitely has that history with her and therefore has that human connection going about, which makes sense to me. I thought that was a really good point you brought out. And to semi-piggyback off what you were saying, like, yes, I think this is where the film succeeds and why it's such at the very least, a cult phenomenon, where it introduces a lot of these philosophical questions about what makes you human. So people say like, oh, it's love that makes you human. No, it's self-awareness that makes you human. No, what makes you human is your soul, if you're into that sort of thing. There's a lot of really interesting elements and ideas that this movie definitely alludes to. And like I said, coming in with a modern perspective, I'm kind of already used to some of these ideas explored in various forms of media. So I will say this much, though. It seems a little unfair for me to poo-poo on this animated movie because it is one of the bigger impacts in introducing many audiences around the world on some of these ideas. Is it terribly unique in those ideas? No, but it definitely has its own kind of story to tell. Matter of fact, we were talking about humans being hacked. When that first came up, I told Mirella the implanted memory thing kind of made me think of Total Recall, that Arnold Schwarzenegger movie that came out in, I believe, 1990. But I don't know if that was based off of a graphic novel of the same name or a book. Usually movies around those times do. I know implanted memories is not a new concept. I know there's multiple stories, sci-fi, and even period piece settings have done things like that. So it's really interesting to kind of explore themes like that, like what makes it real or not. But I feel like for this particular movie, Ghost in the Shell, some of the themes you might expect from implanted memories is a whole other different case of exploration. But I think the main focus, as we said before with Ghost in the Shell, is more or less what makes you human. Not so much like, is your life real or not? I think that's probably a different existential thing you have to go through. But yeah, no, like we were mentioning before, there's like a lot of interesting themes that were introduced in this movie. And to kind of transition it, unless there's any other points you want to bring up, Mirella.
No, I just wished, now looking back on it, I do wish it had a little bit more of a modern sensibility in terms of editing. There was like a part where Major and Bateau were talking in an elevator, and it was just like 4 minutes of them talking, but they were barely moving. And it was actually, they were saying really important things. So I was trying to think about it as, well, they're saying something important, and I just have to listen and not pay attention to the picture too much. Because what they're saying is really, really interesting, because they're arguing about, are my own memories planted? How much of me is me? And Bateau just being like, dude, you're overreacting here. And I was wondering if that part could have just been a little bit more interesting in order to keep the audience's attention, because I was fearing that for that long a period of time, people just kind of glaze over. So I agree with you. I wish some parts were a little less talky and a little bit less info dumps.
Yeah. No, I'm glad you brought that up, because that kind of transitioned to what I kind of want to talk about next regarding Ghost in the Shell. Not so much the movie, but maybe the property itself. Watching this, my complaint with the exposition dump, or just talking about things, after I watched it, I thought to myself, man, this would have been really good as like a HBO Max miniseries, or just like a 6-parter episode series, just kind of like. And again, I have no context for the manga, the other OVAs, the spin-off series, whatever. I have no context for those, but just based off this movie purely alone, and not Ghost in the Shell 2, Innocence, I think it would have served really well if we had like 30 to 40 minute, maybe animated segments telling the story. And if you're going to pull from the manga, maybe dedicate 1 chapter per episode until you get to completion of like maybe episode 8 or 10 or 9, whatever, however far it goes. And I think that would have been a really good way to unravel, because I assume this is a really complicated and in-depth world. And I think if we had a slow build-up to the Puppet Master's reveal and just like really feel what the characters are going through, some of the troubles and the philosophical turmoils that they might be going through, I feel like that would have paid off a lot in the end. And again, I'm not saying the US industry should do this, or maybe the Japanese film industry should explore this again. I don't know. I think that would serve the story really well if we had something like that in the future to like really bring in the modern age of audiences into something like this. Because right now, as far as I can tell, Mirella, there are a lot of successful TV shows out there that were originally based off some graphic novels and things like that. Like, and I'm just saying this purely not reading the graphic novel, but hearing such good things about it from other people. Why the Last Man is coming out on FX, and that's been in development for quite a long time. I don't know if you've heard of that story before.
Yeah, I have. Yeah.
And originally it was going to be a trilogy movie. And I think Keanu Reeves was back to produce it. I don't know if he was to star in it, and I could be completely wrong on that. But the point is, they eventually came around and said, like, actually, you know what? Instead of making this into a series of movies, let's make this a mini-series FX TV show style and just tell the story that way. And another example I could think of that has been proven more or less is Amazon Prime's Invincible, which was also a graphic novel comic book series. But instead of making a movie, which I think they are making a movie of it, but they started out as a 10 episode, or maybe it was 9, I don't remember, just slowly telling the story about how this world is. And I really feel like Ghost in the Shell can be revitalized to modern audiences if they pursued something like that. Do you think I'm off base saying something like that? Or do you think they already tried doing something like that before?
I think I got to get you to watch some of the miniseries and the series for it. See what you feel about that. And plus, I haven't seen that stuff in a really long time. I'd be curious to look at it with fresh eyes. Absolutely.
And like I said, I am curious about this world and its impact on things. And you told me yourself, Ghost in the Shell 2, you have a tendency to remember that more than the first one.
Yeah, I think it came out right at the time where I was really paying attention to anime and manga. So I really connected to Ghost in a Shell 2. But again, I haven't seen it in like 10 years. So I'd also be curious to rewatch that. But I remember it also made a huge impact on me.
So I definitely think that's something fun that could be explored. And for those who are listening and know me fairly well, you guys know I am not a big fan of anime in general, but I do enjoy some of these milestone Japanese films and animation that have come out that had such a large impact on things. So if you guys have any suggestions, if you think I should check out Ghost in the Shell 2, if you want Mirella to join as well, let us know in the comment section below if you're curious about a discussion like that. Someone who has seen it and someone who has not. Get those two different sides to see if there's anything that holds up, disagreements, what have you. That's always fun. So let us know in the comment section below, as well as any other series you think that I should check out that I probably would not otherwise. Well, with that being said, folks, you heard our opinion, but now we want to hear yours. Let us know in the comment section below, what did you think of the 1995 Japanese animated film Ghost in the Shell? Did you like it? Did you not like it? Share your thoughts. Join the conversation. Be sure to like, share, subscribe, ring that bell to be notified when new videos drop. And if you want to support me directly, consider going to my Patreon. Follow me on Twitter at MJSella. Or if you want to watch me do some animation in Toon Boom Harmony via Twitch, check me out there. Links are in the description below. This is Matt Sella.
And this is Mirella.
Thanking you all for tuning in.
Yay!